Chapter 117, 15 June Roman 2, Interlude, Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore had lived a long, eventful life, and he had seen a lot in his time. He had not, as the cynics might say, seen everything. There was enough wonder in the magical world to fill many lifetimes. Yet even so, at his age, he cherished the days when he could learn something truly new, most of the time. This Wasnatone of those times, Harley Potter, child of prophecy, had somehow managed to stumble into the trap he had so meticulously laid for Lord Voldemort. It was not lost on him that the explanation for the latter issue might be contained in the former, but at the same time there was another, even more surprising explanation sitting right in front of him. Harley Potter had somehow turned up Alivingfather, something he would certainly not have expected of Lily. Oh, he had no doubt of the truth of it. The fact that he washer was proof enough, and a great deal of the gossip around Holly this year suddenly made more sense in that light. But to say he was a complication would be an understatement, for this was not just any father. Tony Stark was a muggle, but a muggle who was world-famous, incredibly intelligent, fantastically wealthy, just that wealthy. Dumbledore had never had a need to investigate, and powerful enough to fight alien invaders without the use of magic. And had managed to get into Dumbledore's own school, and perhaps even fight Voldemort too, all without his knowledge. And right now, Albus Dumbledore had to ensure Tony Stark's life was not in danger while also ensuring that there was no threat from Voldemort or his servants. "Mr. Stark," he said, "how may I help?" "Gotta get the rest of the armor off," the man said, clearly fighting through the pain. "Completely dead. Have to do it manually." "There's a button under the edge of the pieces," Harley added helpfully. She was trying to work her fingers into the elbow joint of the gauntlet. "I understand, Harley. Please step back for a moment," Dumbledore said. She did so, and he pointed his wand and said, "Alohomora." The entire suit of armor opened up at once, while the odd circle of blue light that had singed a hole in his shirt stopped flickering and attained a steady glow. Stark looked down at the broken remains of his armor and then back up at Dumbledore. "Crap, you can just do that," he said worriedly. "Under these circumstances, yes, it might be an interesting experiment to test the spell on a working suit. But first, what of Quirrell? He's over there." Stark pointed into the shadows across the chamber where a prone figure lay. Dumbledore stood and approached it, but he stopped when Stark added, "I shot him in his second face." Dumbledore stopped and turned back to him. "Second face?" he asked. "Voldemort's face was on the back of his head, Professor," Harley told him. That set Dumbledore running again. On approaching the figure, though, it was clear his urgency was unnecessary. He was relieved, if a little disappointed, to find a body lying limp, the eyes glassy, and the skin already turning even paler and blotchy. Quirrell looked far more unhealthy up close. He was thin, and his face was turning hollow, clearly ravaged by stress in life. When he bent down to look closer, Dumbledore thought he even saw a hint that his eyebrows were growing in white. Meanwhile, the second face on the back of his head was a ruin of burns, but the red eyes and snake-like nose were all too familiar. Several more oddities of the past year fell into place, most obviously Quirrell's sudden penchant for wearing a turban everywhere he went. He was also acutely aware that his trap had failed to actually capture Voldemort. Not having a body, he had been able to escape the castle in incorporeal form whilst leaving his servant behind. But far more alarming was that Voldemort had entered the school without his knowledge, not just to walk into his trap, but for the entire year, and the question at the forefront of his mind was, how did I miss this? He stood again and walked back to Harley and Stark solemnly. "What is it?" Stark asked. "Dead, I am afraid," he said. "He's dead," Harley squeaked in horror. "Damn," groaned Stark. "I didn't want to kill him yet. I wanted to get him tied to a chair and interrogated by some scary friends of mine first." "A noble sentiment, Mr. Stark," Dumbledore said, ignoring the qualification on that statement. "Alas, Voldemort is not one to leave such loose ends. If it helps, his death was not by your hand, I think." "What? How's that?" Nothing else hit him. Quirrell was possessed by Voldemort, Dumbledore explained. Possession is an obscure and very dark form of magic, and even partial possession like this is extremely harsh on the body. Two souls are not meant to share one body, and absent even rarer protective magics, they cause the body to rebel against itself. With chronic possession, multiple organ failure will set in between a few months, and rarely a few years. Harley, due to an unfortunate incident, is aware that Quirrell was drinking unicorn blood to sustain himself. I do not know if you are aware of the effects of unicorn blood, Mr. Stark. I told him, Harley said quickly. The centaur explained it to me. Ah, good. Well, after you injured Quirrell's body to the point where it was no longer useful to Voldemort, his spirit fled. He shows just as little mercy to his followers as his enemies. I am quite certain that the shock combined with the months of accumulated damage was the cause of Quirrell's death. Well, that's one thing taken care of, Stark said. But that means Voldemort's still out there, then. Alas, he is, Dumbledore told him seriously. You cannot kill what is not truly alive. I do not know if it will be in month, a year, or 50 years, but Heweltree to return again. The fire returned to Stark's eyes. Well, next time I'll be ready for him, he said. Let's go. Stark put his arm around Holly's shoulders, and she tried to help him up, but his legs gave out almost immediately, and they both flopped back to the ground. Ah, yeah, that's a sprain, he groaned. Please allow me, Dumbledore said. He pointed his wand at him and uttered, Mobile Corpus. His body rose to about the height of a table, lying out flat in midair. Whoa, this is weird, he said. His hands swayed as if he were underwater. It feels like I'm in a hammock, but there's nothing there. You may rest now, Mr. Stark, Dumbledore instructed him. I will escort you and Harley to our hospital wing. I dare say you will need the attention of our Mediwitch before you return to your usual worker, but first there is one last thing to do. He walked over to the mirror of Erist. Now that the trap was sprung, there was no more need to keep the philosopher's stone here, except he didn't see it. The reflection of himself holding the stone wasn't there. Instead, he only saw what he normally saw. His family, alive and whole, together with a Gellert Grindelwald who had learnt the error of his ways. He drew his wand and waved it over the mirror, weaving enchantments to detect the signature of his own personal magic. It was possible that he had been foiled by his own trick. But no, there was no mistake. It wasn't there. I don't understand, he said. The stone is no longer in the mirror. Did Quirrell manage to retrieve it? No, Professor. I have it, Harley spoke up behind him. He turned around and saw her fish through her pockets and pull out a large, blood-red stone. You, Harley, he said in surprise. Yes, Sir Quirrell made me look in the mirror. I wanted to get the stone before he did, so I thought it would show me where it was hidden, but then it just appeared in my pocket. Was it not supposed to do that? Dumbledore sighed and returned to the two of them. If you don't mind, Harley, he asked her, and with the innocence of a child who had far more important things to worry about than gold, she easily placed the stone in his palm. Then he looked around the chamber one more time. He waved his wand, and Harley's wand and her invisibility cloak flew back into her hands to the girl's surprise. Another wave, and Stark began to float toward the exit. Harley hurried to keep up. The mirror of Erist was enchanted to return the stone only in very specific circumstances, he explained. You see, only one who wanted toughened stone find it, but Nartusate would be able to get it. Otherwise, they would just see themselves making gold or drinking elixir of life. I had thought it was one of my more brilliant ideas, but I did not anticipate others coming in here. He didn't say, but Harley might have thought the rest of it, and Stark even more so. The stone had been in no danger from Quirrell or Voldemort until she had pulled it out of the mirror. But luckily, it had not come to that, though he made a mental note to speak with Nicholas and Perenelle as well. After this debacle, he would have to ask them if it might finally be time for them to pass on. They passed the potions, the enchanted flames now gone out and neutralized so that no ashwinders or salamanders would grow, and the troll, now more humanely sedated. Harley began holding her father's hand as they walked. Stark, in spite of himself, appeared to be asleep already. The injuries had likely taken more out of him than he let on. "I must ask, Harley," Dumbledore said conversationally, "when did you learn that your father was Iron Man?" "Tonight, sir," she said. He turned to look at her, eyebrows raised. "Tonight, I mean to say, I found out he was Iron Man tonight. I knew he was Anthony Stark last summer. I really should have remembered that Tony was short for Anthony, honestly. But it was when Hagrid took me to Gringotts. They said I had to take an identity test, and it said my real father was still alive." "Hagrid knew," he said in surprise. He was certain Hagrid would have told him something like that if he'd asked. But then, of course, he hadn't known to ask the right questions. Although now that he thought about it, Lily and James had been on a break at the appropriate time for it to happen, and if there was discrepancy in her parentage, it must have come out at Gringotts. "Yes, sir," said Harley, oblivious to his thoughts. "You didn't know then?" "Certainly not." "Given the circumstances, I find it unlikely that even their closest friends knew. May I ask what of James, if you know it?" "He knew, if that's what you mean. I'm not entirely sure when, but the test said he adopted me a month after I was born." Dumbledore nodded. Privately, that was a relief, both for Harley's sake, and because it allowed the simplest possible reinterpretation of the prophecy to stand. He didn't know what heat would have meant if Voldemort had chosen a target who secretly didn't even qualify. The chessmen were all intact again and standing on their starting squares as intended, but that was no matter. He simply bade the White King to step aside, ushered all three of them onto the King's Square, and called out F3, then G4, and all the pieces, black and white, stood aside. He looked down at Harley's surprised face. "I believe Muggles call that a back door," he said. "Was that a fool's mate, sir?" "Indeed, and it may be played as black as well." Voldemort would never think of it, and even if he did, his pride might compel him to win the game the normal way. She nodded thoughtfully as they moved on, but a moment later she said, "Oh, and Madame Pomfrey knows about my dad, too. We told her when I was panicking about New York." "I see." "And Miss Granger and Mr. Weasley, I am certain," he said with a small smile. "I admit I am surprised I did not find them tagging along in the unfortunate predicament in which you found yourself." "Oh, Dad sent them back to bed. He could only carry one of us down here safely. He didn't want me to come either, but he needed help if something happened to his armor." That made Dumbledore feel somewhat better about Stark's parenting skills, at least. "Didn't you get Hermione's letter?" Harley added. "A letter we must have crossed in mid-flight." "No, I was alerted by the detection charms I had placed on the mirror informing me that Quirrell had made an attempt on the stone. It was also how I knew that there were others down here tonight." Harley slowed, suddenly growing tense, and she gripped her father's hand tighter. "So," she said worriedly, "so you would have known all along that he was there." Dumbledore sighed. "Harley, there will be time for recriminations in the morning," he told her. "I assure you I will not be immune from them myself, but for now you should rest and not worry over it. The stone is safe, and I have no doubt that you did what you believed was right tonight, and for that I am proud of you." He gave Harley a minute. She was sniffling as they came to the room of flying keys. But when she had collected herself, he summoned the two broomsticks, one he himself had used to fly down here, and the one that Quirrell and Harley had evidently used to catch the key. The door was shut on the other side. This time, however, they did not take to the air just yet. "The other door takes a different key. The trap was meant to slow Voldemort in both directions, but I have a copy, of course," he explained. Harley looked down at her feet. "Dad said you ought to," she mumbled. He opened that door and they passed through it. "This is where we must fly our way out," he said, handing her a broom. "I will see to you, father." She mounted her broom and lifted off. Dumbledore did the same, still levitating Stark alongside him. They swiftly flew above the devil's snare. The vines tried to reach up to them, but he repelled them with a spray of sparks, and then they continued up to the trapdoor. As they reached it, Dumbledore flicked his wand. and the harp Quirrell had left behind sprang to life and began playing a tune to put Fluffy to sleep. They were silent until they had left the room, continuing along the third floor to the hospital wing. "Sir, there are some other things I'd like to know, if you can tell me," she spoke up again. "Things I want to know the truth about, the truth," Dumbledore sighed. "It is a beautiful and terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution. However, I shall answer your questions unless I have a very good reason not to, in which case I beg you'll forgive me. I shall not, of course, lie. Well, Voldemort said that he only killed my mother because she tried to stop him from killing me, but why would he want to kill me in the first place?" Dumbledore sighed very deeply this time. "Alas, the first thing you ask me I cannot tell you, not tonight, not now. You will know, one day. Put it from your mind for now, Harley. When you are older, you hate to hear this, but you should not be burdened with such things at your age, and it is weighty enough that it would be better to hear it from your father. There are many things I must speak with him about, and that is one of them. He will be better positioned to decide what to tell you." "Yes, sir," Harley said reluctantly. After another minute, she asked, "And the invisibility cloak, who sent it to me?" "Ah, here, Father, he would be your stepfather. I think happened to leave it in my possession, and I thought you might like it." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "Useful thinks your stepfather used it mainly for sneaking off to the kitchens to steal food when he was here. And there's something else. Fire away." "Quirrell," said Snape. "Professor Snape, Harley." "Yes, him. Quirrell said he hates me because he hated my father. I guess he must have meant James." "Is that true? Well, they did rather detest each other, not unlike yourself and Mr. Malfoy. And then James did something Snape could never forgive." "What?" "He saved his life." "What?" "Yes," said Dumbledore dreamily. "Funny, the way people's minds work, isn't it? Professor Snape couldn't bear being indebted to the man he believed to be your father. I dare say he is in for quite the shock when this comes to light, but I do believe he worked so hard to protect you this year because he felt that would make him and James even. Then he could go back to hating his memory in peace." Harley screwed up her face, trying to understand, but they had already reached their destination. "And we have reached the hospital wing," Dumbledore said. He levitated the sleeping Tony Stark onto the nearest bed. "Please wait here, Harley. I will fetch Madame Pomfrey." Chapter 118, 15 June Roman 3, Interlude, Harley. Harley waited by her dad's beside for Dumbledore to return. She considered trying to wake him, but she decided to let him sleep. She had a lot to think about anyway. Now that she had a chance to sit down, she suddenly felt how long a day she'd had. How long a week, really, all the way back to her detention in the Forbidden Forest. And now, her entire world had been turned upside down in just the past couple hours. Her dad was a superhero, not to mention a super genius, super rich and super famous, and she had completely missed it. All those times, not just Tarduin, he'd said he'd be there for her, when he'd said he'd fly out to Hogwarts and take care of her problems for her, when he said he'd even make Snape behave himself. All of those had real teeth behind them. She hadn't thought he'd be able to do even if he wanted to, but Tony Stark had fought terrorists and space aliens and Norse guards, and now he was at Hogwarts and had shot Voldemort in the face with a jury-rigged weapon, even though he'd had to burn his hand to do it. Harley wasn't used to someone having her back. Hermione and Ron did, of course. They'd been ready to charge off to face Voldemort himself with her. For adults, Hagrid came the closest, but he hadn't believed her about Snape, whom she'd been wrong about. She now knew. But her dad was behind her 100%. She wasn't sure how to deal with that just yet. Professor Dumbledore returned a few minutes later with Madame Pomfrey in tow. The lights rose as they entered, not like a hospital, but bright enough to read and work by. Harley could hear muffled voices as they approached. "Also regret to inform you that Professor Quirrell is dead," Dumbledore was saying. "Dead? How?" Madame Pomfrey said in surprise. "He attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone. Harley's father came to stop him and was forced to defend himself." "Goodness, to think poor Quirinus would end like that." Madame Pomfrey hurried over to the bed. "Miss Potter, this is you father?" she asked. Holly jumped to her feet. "Yes, Madam Pomfrey," she said. "He was hurt down in the—" "Yes, yes, I can see that," she said, and she began waving her wand over him. "Looks like he took a nasty fall. Wait, what is this?" "What?" Holly said worriedly. "I don't know, I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble seeing through this. There's all kinds of magic on him. Curse residue, but also something else. And what is this thing?" She tapped her wand to the circle of blue light. "Is it implanted in his chest?" She grasped the edge of the device with her fingers. "Don't!" Holly cried, reaching out her hand. Madame Pomfrey froze. "He said it's a pacemaker or something like it." "A pacemaker?" she asked. "An electronic device that keeps the heart beating normally if there's a problem with it." "Electric? But that's impossible. Muggle electrics don't work at Hogwarts." Harley shrugged. "His armor was electronic, too, and it worked. I don't know how it worked, but it did, at least when it was closed up." Madame Pomfrey waved her wand over the light again. Holly couldn't see that it was doing anything, but it must have made sense to her, or at least have been something she could interpret. Madame Pomfrey shook her head. "I can't see what's happening with his heart. There's too much interference, and it's of a kind I haven't seen before. In fact, some of it even looks alchemical. Headmaster, could you—" she started, but she caught herself and looked back at Holly. "Excuse me, Miss Potter, I'm used to having students in here. As next of kin, I must inform you that you have a right to refuse Professor Dumbledore's help and request a certified healer from St. Mungo's, however, Hyson of the world's foremost experts on alchemy." Harley looked at Dumbledore in surprise. Something about confidentiality or licensing. She didn't know how that worked, and she was too tired to care right now. "He can help," she said quietly. "Very well. Headmaster, would you take a look at this?" Dumbledore approached her dad's bedside and also waved his wand over his chest. He hummed to himself for a minute as he considered the device, and then he looked up and said, "Well, it certainly appears alchemical in nature. I do not know how a Muggle could have acquired such a device, but I understand that Mr. Stark is known for a great deal of advanced and unusual scientific innovation." "Can you clear up the interference?" Madame Pomfrey asked. "Unfortunately, I am unsure what it even is at the moment. I have a theory, but I will have to consult my books. In the meantime, it may be easier to see what is happening if we turn him over." With a flick of his wand, Harley's dad levitated off the bed, flipped over onto his stomach, and settled back down. He seemed to still be sleeping peacefully through it all. "Ah, yes, that's better," Madame Pomfrey said, waving her wand over him again. "Now let's see Whatmerlin's beard." "What is it?" Harley yelped. There's metal shrapnel in his chest," she said. "A good deal of it and nearly into his heart. It thighs shouldn't be possible. Left untreated, I'd say it would be fatal within days, but the wounds look old." "He said he'd had it since Afghanistan," Harley said worriedly, "and that was, I dunno, 2 or 3 years ago." But suddenly the pieces fell into place. "Oh, is it magnetic?" she asked. She dug into her pockets. "He gave me this big magnet to use in case the pacemaker thing failed." She set the magnet down on the bedside table and remembered too late that there was a metal lamp sitting on the table. Moving of their own accord, the magnet and the lamp smashed into each other so hard that the glass shattered, the wick was blown out, and the lamp's iron fragment around the magnet into a mangled mass. Harley winced and looked down at the floor. "Sorry," she squeaked. "Not a problem, Harley," Dumbledore said. He needed only a wave of his wand to separate the magnet from the mass, repair the lamp, and set it back on the table. Even the flame was relit. He levitated the magnet to himself. "I think this will be safer in Madame Pomfrey's office," he said. "If you don't object." Harley and Madame Pomfrey both shook their heads. Finally, Harley found her voice again. "Can you help him?" she asked. "In an emergency, I could vanish the shrapnel myself," she said, "although I'd still prefer to call in a specialist. It's a tricky operation, even with magic. However, the gaping hole in his chest that he's apparently been living with Fortwo Yerswill need a stay in St. Mungo's to heal." She spoke with the same tone that, if you believed the stories, she used on students who didn't want to cooperate. But she collected herself and continued, "As for the rest of this, there's still a lot of dark magic residue here. Do you know what caused these injuries, Miss Potter?" Harley shivered. "The green light," she whispered. Madame Pomfrey and Dumbledore both stared at her in shock. "The green light," Dumbledore said. She nodded. "Quirrell cast a curse. There was a green light, and I think I know it was the same one Voldemort used." She didn't need to say the rest. In that moment, she couldn't bear to tell them how she'd had nightmares her whole life about that sickly green light. Madame Pomfrey flinched when she said the name and fumbled with her wand, but Dumbledore's eyes were sharp and calculating. He pulled up a chair to sit beside her and said, "You witnessed this, Harley." She nodded. "What were you doing when Quirrell cast that curse?" "What? What did that have to do with anything?" But she answered, "I was hiding under my invisibility cloak." "You have an invisibility cloak, Potter," Madame Pomfrey demanded. Harley flinched. "Oops," she said. "I trust you will keep that to yourself, Poppy," Dumbledore said. He was surprisingly stern for talking to a staff member. "As you can see, Harley has unique security concerns that necessitate such a measure." Then, turning back to Harley, he said, "Were you doing anything else at the time?" Roman 2 yelled to warn him, but there wasn't enough time to dodge. "And what did you do next?" "I sneaked over and tried to help him before Quirrell heard me." "Professor, does this matter at all?" Dumbledore seemed to relaxed, as if there were nothing at all strange about his line of questioning. "No, Harley," he said. "Dark curses like that can sometimes leave an effect on their environment or even the reverse, but it sounds like there was nothing unusual about this case." "But then, how did he survive?" Madame Pomfrey cut in. "I can only guess that his armor was strong enough to absorb it," Dumbledore said. "I will have to investigate it more thoroughly. His armor was in pretty bad shape after that," Harley agreed. "Wait, armor, a muggle," Madame Pomfrey said, and Harley suddenly realized she had no idea who her dad was either. "Ah, yes. As I was saying before, this is a sensitive case for another reason, Poppy," Dumbledore spoke up. "In addition to being Harley's father, this man is Mr. Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man. He is one of the Muggle champions who fought the alien invaders in New York last month. I dare say he is as famous in his world as Harley is in ours." "Goodness," she looked up at Harley. "You didn't mention that before. That's why you were so concerned about the battle." No. It didn't actually find that out until tonight," she admitted. She still felt embarrassed every time she had to say it. "Oh well, then," she answered. "There doesn't appear to be any permanent damage. Plenty of sprains and bruises, of course, burns on his hand, and a broken rib. He'll need to stay here a couple days to heal those and clean out the dark magic residue, and then we can talk about transferring him to St. Mungo's to fix the hole in his chest." "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey," Harley said, sniffling a little. "I'm just doing my job." "Now, were you hurt, Miss Potter?" "No, just really tired," she answered, but then she thought again and added, "except something odd happened when Quirrell grabbed me." "Oh, it did," Dumbledore said, immediately alert again. "Yes, my scar hurt really bad. It felt someone was stabbing me in the head. But Quirrell was hurt, too. His hands were burnt, and he couldn't hold on to me. Do you know what happened, Professor?" To her surprise, Dumbledore didn't answer right away, but instead gave a sharp look to Madame Pomfrey. She hesitated, pressing her lips into a thin line as McGonagall so often did, but she relented, saying, "I'll just be a moment," and bustled back to her office. "Excuse me, Harley, but you should be careful how widely you spread such information about Voldemort," Dumbledore said. "Though your close friends and family are of course acceptable." He motioned for her to sit on the bed, and she did. "Yes, I believe I do know what happened," he continued. "Your mother died to save you. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love. He didn't realize that love as powerful as your mother's for you leaves its own mark. Not a scar, no visible sign have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. It is in your very skin." Quirrell, full of hatred, greed, and ambition, sharing his soul with Voldemort, could not touch you for this reason. It was agony to touch a person marked by something so good. Dumbledore now became very interested in a bird out on the windowsill, which gave Holly time to dry her eyes on the sheet. As she did, Madame Pomfrey returned, carrying some potion bottles. She set them down on her dad's beside table, then came around to Holly's bed and drew her wand. "Severe headaches, you said, but you didn't hit your head at any point." "No," she answered. "And you're certain it was your scar, not anywhere else on your head?" "Yes." "I think it was when she glanced at Dumbledore and chose her words more carefully. "I've been getting them off and on for a while, and now that know what happened, I think it was to do with Quirrell." Madame Pomfrey looked suspicious, but she didn't call her on it. "HMNO, obvious head trauma or other natural causes of a headache," she said. "The curse scar isn't something that can be helped, I'm afraid. Sometimes they simply do things like that, and yours is more unusual than most. As for the rest of it, I think simple stress and exhaustion. Nothing a good night's sleep won't cure, but I want you to spend Itharefa tonight. I'll check you over again in the morning, just in case." Dumbledore, however, was still very interested in the bird on the windowsill. Then he got up to open the window. "Excuse me, Poppy, but I believe that owl wishes an audience." He lifted the glass, and a familiar owl hopped inside. She stood on Holly's bedside table with an envelope in her beak and glared at the headmaster. "Hedwig," Holly said, and she laughed. "That'll be Hermione's letter for you, Professor." But then the smile dropped off her face at once. "Oh no, Hermione and Ron will be waiting up for me. Probably Neville, too." She started to get up, but she had barely moved before she was stopped by Madame Pomfrey's stern look. "I should write back to them," she said, changing tack. "Do you have a quill?" Pomfrey fetched a quill for her, but she told her, "Keep it short, Miss Potter. You should be resting." "Of course, Madame Pomfrey." Chapter 119, 15 June Roman 4. Note from Holly to Hermione. Note delivered to Hermione Granger at Hogwarts, 15 June 2012, way too early in the morning, got out Sophie Stone's safe, Quirrell's dead. It was Quirrell, not Snape. Voldemort's gone. From Hogwarts, I mean. Dumbledore's here, in the hospital wing now. Holly. Chapter 120, 15 June v. Interlude, Holly. Holly woke first that day, even though she slept late into the morning. Madame Pomfrey immediately called for breakfast for her, then looked her over again, pronounced her in good health, and said she was free to go. Of course, Holly stuck around, wanting to stay by her dad. Not long after that, Hermione and Ron came in. They had apparently been checking the infirmary every hour since curfew ended in the morning to see if she had woken. Madame Pomfrey allowed them in to visit with Holly only after a stern warning not to disturb her father. They, of course, wanted to know everything. "There's wild rumors going around already," Ron told her. "Dumbledore told everyone Quirrell was dead, but that's it." What really happened? Having been witness to the Hogwarts rumor mill for a year, Holly thought the real story was wilder than any rumors were likely to be. After all, the rumors were extremely unlikely to guess that a Muggle superhero would appear at Hogwarts. She told them everything from the time they'd gone back to bed. How she'd outflown Iron Man to catch the flying key, how Jarvis had wiped the board with McGonagall's chess set, about the troll, their argument over Snape's potions, Quirrell, the mirror, the stone, and Voldemort, and then Dumbledore arriving to save them. Ron and Hermione were a very good audience. They gasped in all the right places, and when Holly told them what was under Quirrell's turban, Hermione screamed out loud. However, they were less enthused when they learnt that Dumbledore had been monitoring the protections on the stone the whole time. "So the stone was never in any danger," Hermione moaned. "We only messed it up, and you could have been killed." Holly shook her head. She'd had plenty of time to think about it herself. "We thought Snape had Dumbledore fooled," she said. "If we'd been right, it really might have been in danger." It sounded like that was even part of Quirrell's plan. "Well, it's a good thing your dad showed up then," Ron said. "Listen, are you gonna be able to play in the Quidditch final tomorrow? We'll get flattened without you, and if we win, we can at least get out of last place for the House Cup." Oh, I'd forgotten all about the Quidditch final, Harley exclaimed. But of course I'll be there, Roo. Maybe Dad can come and see it. That'd be great. Are you sure about that? Hermione asked nervously. Quidditch looks awfully dangerous by Muggle standards. But Harley wasn't worried. After last night, how bad can it be? About half an hour after that, perhaps alerted by Hermione and Ron, Neville came running into the hospital wing. Harley, he nearly shouted, are you all right? Your note said you were in the hospital wing, so I didn't know, and Ron and Hermione wouldn't tell me anything. Oh, I've got your letter. Did you want it back? And to her horror, he reached into his robes and pulled out the envelope she'd given him last night. Harley leapt to her feet, wide-eyed, and pulled him away to the corner of the room. Neville, Neville, be quiet, she hissed. She nervously looked over to her dad's bed to make sure Neville hadn't woken him. She didn't want to think about how he'd react if he saw what she wrote. It's done. I don't need it anymore. Neville looked back where she was looking and was of course surprised to see a strange man lying in one of the beds. Harley, who's that? He whispered. He's the one I wanted the letter sent to. He's my dad. What? Neville gasped. But it's a long story. I found out about him when I went to Gringotts last summer. No one else knew. But Thenia, Mum, before she got married, she said hurriedly. Listen, Neville, I've got it sorted out, but don't tell anyone just yet, will you? It'll probably come out soon. Maybe tomorrow even, but I don't want any trouble before then. Okay, Harley, he said. But did you want your letter? No, she hissed. She grabbed the envelope and stuffed it back in his robes. Take it away, take it, and burn it somewhere nobody else is watching. He doesn't ever need to know about that. Neville put the letter back in his robes. Was it really that bad last night? He asked nervously. Harley nodded. It was. And look, I'm sorry for brushing you off last night. You had good reason not to want us going out again. I was trying to avoid getting into that kind of mess, believe it or not. It's just that we thought we had good reasons, Tory'sons more important than the House Cup. Only, Dumbledore told me we needn't have bothered. Oh, we didn't get in trouble, she added at Neville's worried expression. But we needn't have bothered, and it could have been a lot worse. Thanks then, Harley, Neville said awkwardly. Thankfully, he didn't stick around after that. Neville was a good person, but this wasn't exactly the best time. Things only got more awkward after that, though. Once the word got out that Harley Potter was in the hospital wing, all of her friends started dropping by with well wishes and gifts, mostly in the form of sweets, even though she was only a visitor at this point. Soon she had a table full of them, and she started to think that the fact her dad was here might get out tardy at this rate. It was during one such attempted visit, when Madame Pomfrey suddenly started shouting from the doorway, that her dad startled awake. No, out. That's completely unsanitary and inappropriate. Out. Her dad shot halfway up to a sitting position and looked around frantically for a few seconds before his eyes fell on Harley, and he relaxed back onto the bed. Oh, I apologize for waking you, Mr. Stark, Madame Pomfrey said as she hurried back to his bedside. Just a minor issue that had to be dealt with. What was that about? He asked. She gave an exasperated sigh. Harley's friends, Fred and George Weasley, showed up and were attempting to bring in a gift-wrapped toilet seat. Harley started giggling, but her dad gave her a funny look and said, Is that normal around here? It is for them, she said. At the beginning of the year, I overheard their mum warning them not to go and blow up a toilet. They're probably off to post it to their sister now. Madame Pomfrey grumbled, but moved on, waving her wand over her dad. Now, my name is Poppy Pomfrey, Mr. Stark. I am the licensed mediwitch here at Hogwarts. You are currently in the infirmary after Harley and the headmaster brought you in early this morning. You'll be happy to know you're well on the mend, at least with regard to your injuries. You'll need another day to rest, of course, but it could have been a lot worse. New injuries? Something wrong with the old injuries? He asked. It's hard to tell with the interference, but they seem to be stable. Somehow, she put her hands on her hips and told him, I'm sure there's a very entertaining story about how you managed to walk around with an open wound full of shrapnel in your chest for the past several years. Entertaining is not the word I'd use for it, he grumbled. He looked back at Holly uncertainly. How much do you know about when I was in Afghanistan? Only that you were captured by terrorists, and wasn't that disturbing to say. And you fought your way out using your first Iron Man suit. Yeah, that's the public version. What most people don't know, Ishwi was captured. I was coming back from a weapons demo, and the next thing I knew the Humvee was flipped over, my ears were ringing, and he sighed heavily. All the soldiers in the car were dead. I looked around, tried to find a way to safety, but I didn't get anywhere before I came face to face with a bomb with my name on the side. Harley gasped. Remember what I said about my godfather trying to kill me? That was attempt number one. Harley and Madame Pomfrey both flinched, and Madame Pomfrey said, "Is this person still a threat, Mr. Stark?" "Nah, he's dead. When he made attempt number two, I fought back, had to kill him." "Well, technically Pepper did." Harley stared at him in horror. "But back to Afghanistan," he continued. "The terrorists decided I was more valuable to them alive. Genius weapons manufacturer, you know. They had a doctor they were holding prisoner. Yinsen. He got most of the shrapnel out. There was a lot more at first. But he couldn't get all of it, so he rigged up an electromagnet to keep it from getting into my heart. That's what I replaced with the arc reactor." He tapped the light on his chest. "Yinsen didn't make it out. He was a good man." Harley was still staring in horror, with tears in her eyes. Even Madame Pomfrey's mouth was hanging open in shock, and to hear the stories the other student told, hardly anything fazed her. Her dad looked back at her. "I'm sorry," he said, "but you'd have to hear it eventually. But they're gone now. The terrorists, their boss, Obi. And my buddy Rhodey is hunting down their friends with the Air Force." Harley didn't know what to do with that, but Madame Pomfrey collected herself. "You never had the rest of the shrapnel removed?" she asked. "I'm not that familiar with Muggle techniques, but I'd have thought with better equipment they could do it." He shook his head. "I looked into it. A top-rated surgeon in a real hospital could probably do it, but it would be risky. And besides, fixing the hole would need extensive reconstructive surgery and months of recovery. I have responsibilities." "Right now, Mr. Stark, your responsibility is to get better," she said firmly. "After you're well enough to travel, I'm writing you a referral to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. They can have you mended in a week." Harley's dad's eyes grew wide, and he shot halfway up in bed, lifting himself up on his elbows. "A week," he said. "Certainly. Removing the shrapnel should be easy with magic for someone with the proper training. The hard part will be regrowing the soft tissue and bones in sequence so that they all come in straight. Regrow the bones. You can do that. Of course. It's the standard treatment for crushed or shattered bones. But if a section of tissue is completely missing, it gets more complicated. And that's safe." Madame Pomfrey put her hands on her hips. "It's a hell of a lot safer than what you're doing now," she snapped. "Honestly, you came to Hogwarts with a Muggle electrical device that shouldn't even work here." "That's what I said," Harley agreed. "Besides which, it's a miracle you haven't died of an infection yet, and you're lucky those heavy metals leaching into your blood, whatever they are, aren't toxic." Her dad winced. "Yeah, you don't want to know how I got to that point," he muttered. He looked at Harley again and thought for a minute. "You know, this thing saved me from getting mind-controlled by Loki last month," he said, tapping the arc reactor again. But he only needed to think a few seconds more before he said, "But I think I'll take my chances with not having holes in my body." Harley grinned. Her dad turned back to Madame Pomfrey. "A week, you said. How sure are you about that? Because I've got plans with Harley right after school gets out. We've been working for months to make sure custody can get taken care of fast. There's always the possibility of complications, of course, but since the injury wasn't caused magically, I shouldn't expect any trouble." "All right then, I'll take it," he said slowly as he lay back down on the bed. He didn't speak further, but Holly thought she saw tears in his eyes, and then he sat up again. "Oh, and Holly, did you get your aunt and uncle to sign the custody papers?" "Oh, no, sorry," she said. I wasn't sure if the plan had changed." Her dad gave her a sad smile. Neither of them said it, but she could tell he knew exactly Wish was worried about a change of plans. Never gonna happen, he said firmly. We're still on for the 23rd, same as before. Harley beamed. Oh, well, I can send them today then, she said. There's still plenty of time. If Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon didn't make trouble, that was. She hadn't factored her dad being abillionaire into her calculations, but she still had some ideas to get them to cooperate. It was only after lunch that Professor Dumbledore came back into the hospital wing. Good afternoon, Mr. Stark, Harley, he said. I trust you are feeling better. Yeah, lots better, Harley's dad said. That magic healing's some damn good stuff, and I'll be even more impressed if you can really fix my heart. I don't suppose mass production is an option. No, I am afraid not with the resources available to us, Dumbledore answered. One of the reasons we maintain our separation from Muggles is the not unfounded fear that the exposure of magic would lead to demands placed on us that we cannot meet. You can imagine the disaster that would ensue if, for example, magic were to become rationed not by ability, but by money, he grimaced. Yeah, I can, he muttered. I've gotten enough flack just about my suit, which incidentally I'm gonna need back. Even bricked, someone could do a lot of harm with it if it fell into the wrong hands. I have just been down to retrieve it, along with Quirrell's body, he said. I have placed it in storage where the students cannot reach it, and I can also arrange to have it delivered back to the Muggle world, although there may be complications depending on where Edinburgh Airport meet and assist services, but I'll have to call ahead to tell them to expect it. Very well. In the meantime, I confess I took the liberty of examining your armor myself. I couldn't replicate it, of course. I remain mostly ignorant about Muggle electronics. But I believe I now understand how your armor was able to function inside Hogwarts. That startled her dad enough to nearly get him out of bed. You do? He asked. You mean it wasn't Faraday cage? It blocks out other kinds of interference, and it fit with the comms going down, so I just thought it was that. In my experience, magic is not so easily repelled, Mr. Stark. No, I believe the real reason is the substance your armor was made from. When I inspected it, I discovered that the outermost layer is 58% gold by weight, in an impressively strong alloy I have never seen before. Oh yeah, gold titanium alloy. It prevents ice buildup at high altitudes. Dumbledore gave him an amused smile. You built a complete suit of armor out of 14-karat gold to prevent ice buildup. Yep, what does that have to do with magic, though? Gold is not Themagnum opus of alchemy solely for its value. It is also because, as a noble metal, it is exceptionally difficult to make. And gold has a number of magical properties that make it uniquely useful for other applications. It would surprise me far less that an electronic device completely encased in gold could continue operating here as long as it did not need to interact with the outside world. Good to know. That's good news for long-term options. I just have to figure out how to block whatever it was that Quirrell hit me with. Dumbledore suddenly turned very solemn. I fear there is very little chance of being able to block that spell, he said. You do not know how lucky you are. The spell that Quirrell struck you with is called the Killing Curse, which does precisely what it says. Very few things can block it, and until today, I would have said that a suit of armor was not one of them, and only one person has ever survived it with magic alone. Yeah. Who's that? He asked. Dumbledore silently turned to look at Harley. Her dad's face fell. Oh no, he said. Harley stared back with wide eyes. Somehow it wasn't a surprise. It was almost as if she'd always known and just needed someone to fill in the details. It's how I knew what it was last night, she said softly, although I only remember it from my dreams, and I didn't know what it was called. Wait, that was from when you were only a year old, her dad asked. Because that shouldn't be possible. She shrugged uncomfortably and tried to force a smile. Magic, she offered. It wasn't as funny as she'd hoped. Mr. Stark, we have much to discuss, and it would be better to do it in private, Dumbledore concluded. When you're feeling well enough for a visit, I would ask Madame Pomfrey to escort you up to my office. Yes, we'd have a lot to discuss, he agreed darkly. Like how the Heleny off this happened, but the suit may be a way to carry a shield like Roger's. It's too bad we don't have any more vibranium, you know. If that spell kills, the suit did look pretty dead. It's not really alive. Not even Jarvis is technically, but oh no, Jarvis, Holly exclaimed suddenly. She couldn't believe she'd forgot. What happened to him? Is Hegon? He shook his head. Local instance. The master copies back on my personal server. This was really just a piece of him, damn. It dosed me and I lost last night's logs, though. Excuse me, Mr. Stark, did you say a piece of him? Dumbledore cut in, looking suddenly worried. Her dad seemed oblivious. Sure, pretty standard distributed computing stuff. You know, copy a program, run them in parallel, merge the changes back together afterwards. Merge, Issy, Dumbledore said, and this local instance is a normal operation. It does not require any special equipment or unusual procedures. No, this is basic, how computers work type stuff. What's the problem? Dumbledore seemed to catch himself. Ah, forgive me. That is simply not how magic tends to think of things, he said. I am skeptical that your armor being in some sense alive was what allowed you to survive Quirrell's curse, but stranger things have happened. A sufficiently strong alloy might equally do the trick. And I admit I still do not understand in the case of your pacemaker, Holly called it. Yeah, that's what I told her, but it's a lot more than that, her dad explained. It's called an arc reactor. It powers the suit. May I ask how it works? It's a miniaturized fusion reactor. In simple terms, it generates energy by converting hydrogen into helium with a super-heavy element catalyst. Transmutation, Dumbledore said in surprise. Well then, that is no mystery at all. If it converts one element into another, then the device is, in fact, performing alchemy. Except it's not magical, he said. When it comes to moving beyond the usual interactions of electricity and magnetism, the boundary grows thin. Your arc reactor performs an alchemical function, and thus it behaves like a magical artifact and was able to continue operating in Hogwarts. Or perhaps it even registered as magical to the castle. I would have to check the wards. You know, that might also explain how it shorted out Loki's scepter. Maybe I can ask Thor the next time he shows up. That is a little outside my expertise, I am afraid, Dumbledore said. I must return to my work now, but I will await your arrival at your convenience. He left the hospital wing then, but it was only a few minutes before Madame Pomfrey announced that Holly had another visitor. Oh, good, she said. Who is it? Hagrid sidled through the door as she spoke. As usual when he was indoors, Hagrid looked too big to be allowed. Holly stood to greet him, but he took one look at her, burst into tears, and lifted her off the ground in a hug. It's Elmira fault, he sobbed. I told the evil git how to get past Fluffy. I told him. It was the only thing he didn't know, and I told him. Ye could have died, all for a dragon egg. I'll never drink again. I should be chucked out and made to live as a muggle. Hagrid, said Holly's muffled voice. You can put me down now. Hagrid flinched. Oh, sorry, he said sheepishly, and he set her back on her feet. She looked over at her dad. His eyes were wide with alarm, and he looked to be trying to scramble out of bed at the sight. But when he saw she was unharmed, he started to relax. Saw from his size, and the lack of alarms blaring, I'm guessing little John here is Hagrid, he asked. Oh, right, she said. She walked back and stood by his bed and motioned between them. Rubeus Hagrid, groundskeeper and keeper of keys at Hogwarts, or something close to that. This is Tony Stark, also known as Iron Man, world's greatest superhero and my dad. Oh, Hagrid stuttered. He suddenly looked very sheepish and looked down at his feet, trying and failing to look smaller. Mr. Stark, it's good to meet ye. And I, Juice, want to tell ye how sorry I am for my part in what happened to Holly last night. Her dad looked back at her with wide eyebrows. She didn't remember exactly what she'd told him last night, so she explained. Hagrid won a dragon egg in a card game a few months ago. And he was talking with, well, I suppose it must have been Quirrell under the cloak, and he told him about music putting Fluffy to sleep. I mean it, Mr. Stark. I'm jivin' up drinkin', Hagrid sobbed again. It's jivin' me nothing but trouble. Hagrid, said Harley, shocked to see Hagrid shaking with grief and remorse, great tears leaking down into his beard. Hagrid, he'd have found out somehow. This is Voldemort we're talking about. He'd have found out even if you hadn't told him. Ye could have died, sobbed Hagrid. And darn say the name. Voldemort, Harley shouted. She put her hands on her hips and stamped her foot on the floor with a loud clack. Hagrid was so shocked, he stopped crying. I've met him, and I'm calling him by his name. Please cheer up, Hagrid. We saved the stone. It's safe. He can't use it. Here, have a chocolate frog. Angelina and Alicia gave me whole box of them. She handed a chocolate frog to Hagrid, who seemed to take it reluctantly, fumbling with the packaging with his large hands. It was more Hershey's Kiss size to him, after all. She picked up another and handed it to her dad. Want one? She asked. He took the box, opened it and immediately dropped it when the frog started moving and hopped away from him. Whoa, he exclaimed. Luckily, it happened to hop in Harley's direction, and she had half expected that reaction. She casually snatched it out of the air and handed it back to him. He shook his head as he took it. I still don't know where you got those reflexes from. You sure you're not related to Rogers? He hesitantly took a bite and then picked up the card from the box. Cornelius Agrippa, he read off. Oh, Ron's been looking for that one, Harley said. Cornelius Agrippa lived from 1486 to 1535. He wrote books about magic and wizards. Some important people thought his books were evil, so they put him in jail for writing them. That has got to be the most understated description of a witch hunt ever. Here. He handed the card to Harley. Sardragon egg. Right. That was Norbert. We sort of got caught sneaking him out to the Romanian dragon reserve. Norbert was a dragon. Just a baby one, she defended. Her dad leaned back in his bed and shook his head again with an exasperated sigh. What even is this school? He muttered to himself. Harley frowned. Dad, she said nervously. I know Thish hasn't been a very good first impression of Hogwarts. You think, he said. Well, this whole thing has been really strange. It's not normally like this here. And really, a lot of it's my fault too, what happened last night. I ought to have known Dumbledore had everything sorted. Hogwarts is really brilliant the rest of the time, and all my friends are here, and she shrank back a little under his gaze. Could you please just not write off Hogwarts completely? She pleaded. He stared at her for a minute, and Harley was certain he was going to tell her off, but finally he told her, you should get a license for those puppy dog eyes. Fine, I promise I won't write off Hogwarts completely. But I am going to get the full story from the teachers. And I also want you to explain in more detail just why you thought stealing the Philosopher's Stone yourself was the best option. Harley was left very uncomfortable as she had to tell her dad the things she hadn't mentioned in her letter, and she was very thankful that Madame Pomfrey shooed Hagrid out of the room as she started. She explained how she'd realized that Hagrid must have let slip how to get past Fluffy, how they'd initially tried to talk to Dumbledore, but he was out of the castle, how the teachers seemed to think it was suspicious that they weren't enjoying the day outside, how Snape, whom they'd thought was evil, threatened to expel them if they got in any more trouble, and how McGonagall had chased them away from trying to act as lookouts. And then that led into the time McGonagall caught them when they sneaked Norbert out of the castle and had punished them harshly. She glossed over the rest of the saga of Norbert, as well as how upset her housemates had been about it. The story was enough to be getting on with as it was. So she took 50 points from Neville too, even though she thought you were messing with him, he asked. She nodded. I noticed that too the next day, but I didn't want to risk asking her about it. Well, thank you for telling me all that, Harley, he told her awkwardly. I know that probably wasn't easy for you. You'll have to get the teacher's side of the story, of course, but I'm going to have some serious questions for them tomorrow. Harley smiled weakly. Thank you, Dad, she said, and then she remembered what else was happening then. Ooh. I just remembered our Quidditch final is tomorrow. You can come and see it, she said excitedly. Wood says we're a shoo-in for the Quidditch Cup. Her excitement was infectious, and her dad finally smiled again. I'd like that, he said. I've been wanting to see it that, or I'll be panicking over how dangerous it is. One of the two. Quidditch is not that dangerous, Mr. Stark, Madame Pomfrey assured him. It can be rough, but no student has ever suffered a permanent injury from it on my watch. He raised an eyebrow at her, but he said, well, that's honestly more reassuring than most of the stuff I've been hearing lately, coming from someone with a license. Then he thought for a minute longer. Oh, but there's one other problem, he said. What's that? Asked Harley. Happy, my bodyguard. He's waiting back at the hotel for me, and if he doesn't hear from me, he's going to call in help, and it'll get messy. Any chance you can send him a letter? Of course, Harley said. I can give it to Hedwig. Madame Pomfrey, do you have more quills and parchment? Madame Pomfrey retrieved a quill, a roll of parchment, and a bottle of ink from her office, and brought them to Harley's dad on a tray. Do you want some help with that? Harley asked. I reckon you haven't used a quill before. Ha ha, your old man's not so out of touch that he doesn't know how to write, he said. That wasn't a joke. He gave her a confused look, but he moved on and picked up the quill to start his letter. He only got through the 2 lines of chicken scratches and ink blots before he gave up and accepted her help. Chapter 121, 15 June Roman 6, Letter to Happy. Letter delivered to Harold Happy, Hogan in Edinburgh by Owl Post, 15 June 2012. Dear Happy, you don't know me, but my name is Harley Potter, and Mr. Stark is my father, which you probably know already since you came to Scotland with him. He's all right, but I'm taking dictation from him to write this letter because he doesn't know how to use a quill pen. He just found out it's harder than it looks. Dear Happy, I'm still alive, so you can relax and call off the search parties, if you want to know if it's really Melit's Sea. You told me the football was a dumb idea, but you went along with it because you thought being the guy with the football was cooler than being Iron Man's bodyguard. So good news, bad news here. Good news, I found Harley and she's safe. Bad news, the part where I thought there might be a supervillain coming for her, I was right. Apparently her mother was mixed up with some scary stuff. Worse news, they were ready for me with some kind of EMP. The Mark 8's completely bricked. I'm arranging alternate transportation back. Good news, thanks to the changes I made after New York, I still kicked Theros SS's. One bad guy's dead, and the other one's on the run. Also, I met some of Holly's mom's old contacts, and they said they have access to new treatments that they think can fix my injury from Afghanistan. I'll be looking into that this weekend. I know that's going to sound like an insane coincidence, but it's not. Pepper knows enough to verify it for you. Speaking of which, tell Pepper to expect a phone call from me from a new number in 2 or 3 days. Until then, tell her to be as vague as possible with the press releases. I'll probably be staying in the UK straight through my original planned visit, so go ahead and book a room for yourself for the next week. If you want to send a message back, write a letter and give it to the owl, and I'll get it in a few hours. Don't question it, it just works. Tony. Chapter 122, 15 June Roman 7, Interlude, Tony. Tony could tell that Madame Pomfrey, though undoubtedly very competent, was the most annoying sort of doctor or healer, as it were. The kind who was constantly telling you things like, stop pulling all-nighters, or you need to let that heal before you get in another fight, or I can't help you if you keep setting yourself on fire, which was completely unfair. Dummy had that one covered. It was true that she had healed him of his injuries from being blasted into a wall, and his suit ripped open nearly overnight, accomplishing in a matter of hours what would normally take weeks. Although she cautioned that magical repairs were never quite as good as new, and he should take it easy for the next few days while his body finished healing. However, it wasn't a great portent when he asked her if she would escort him to the headmaster's office, and she told him, Professor Dumbledore says you are to be allowed to go, before grudgingly leading him there. It was then that he noticed more fully what he hadn't been able to fully appreciate the night before, which was that this castle made no damn sense. They climbed 3 flights of stairs and somehow ended up 4 floors higher. They walked into a door that wasn't a door at all, but a hallway where the stonework was laid out to look like a door by forced perspective. And she pulled on the halberd of a suit of armor, causing a hidden passageway to open that Tony was sure was set in the exterior wall of the castle. "Is this really the fastest way?" he asked her. "On a Friday, it is," she told him. He suddenly felt very lucky that he'd been able to find the 3rd-floor corridor on the right-hand side at all last night. Was this really what Harley had to deal with every day? Were all magic schools like this? Moments later, Pomfrey led him to a truly grotesque stone gargoyle in front of what looked like a blank wall. She stood before it and spoke in a solemn voice, "Peppermint Toad." Suddenly, and surprisingly quietly, the gargoyle sprang to life and hopped to one side, and the wall behind it opened up into a narrow spiral staircase. A password, he thought. Since when did the principal's office need a password? "Wow," Tony said. "Is there a hunchbacked bell ringer around here too?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Stark," she said. "The headmaster's office is up those stairs. I recommend you heed his instructions for finding your way back." He stepped onto the staircase, and it began to rise like an escalator, despite there being no visible place for the solid stone to come from or go to. He heard the wall close with Atherd. Behind him, not a great sign. And after a full rotation, he came to an oak door with a knocker shaped like a griffin's head. He considered just barging in. It's what he would normally do. But after that walk, he decided not to take a seemingly ordinary door for granted and knocked first. The door opened on its own. Tony walked inside and was overwhelmed by the amount of magic on display. It was noisier than he expected, almost like a clockmaker's shop, or so he assumed. The room was round, high-ceilinged, and would have been spacious, but it was crowded with spindle-legged tables on which stood various silver instruments that didn't match anything he knew from scientific history, and which were constantly whirring, pinging, or emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were lined with alternating high bookcases and portraits. Moving portraits he saw when he looked closer, though their occupants seemed to be sleeping. Along one wall there was a perch on which stood a majestic bird that was definitely not any species known to science. Brilliant red and gold, and looking like a very large eagle crossed with a few other things. And in the middle of it all, there was Albus Dumbledore, sitting at a large, claw-footed desk, looking every bit the part of a fairy tale wizard. Tony dearly wished he had a way to record all of this magic to examine later, but he was also wary. Dumbledore was, by all accounts including his daughters, a good man, but Tony was acutely aware that he was walking alone into the lair of an intelligent and powerful man, with extensive and unknown abilities, and he himself had absolutely no tech with him aside from his arc reactor. He didn't know if he could owe anything if this went sideways, but he was still going to try his damnedest if it did. "Mr. Stark, thank you for coming," Dumbledore said. "Please have a seat." Tony sat in one of the 2 chairs facing the desk. "Not the most welcoming office, is it, hiding it behind a brick wall?" he asked. Dumbledore didn't deny it. "There are many sensitive and potentially dangerous magical artifacts and restricted books in this office, not to mention my private quarters up the stairs behind me. It would not do to have students wandering in on their own. The students are expected to go to their heads of house first for pastoral needs, of course. Now, Mr. Stark," he leaned forward across his desk, steepling his fingers together. "I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Tony leaned forward too, matching his posture. "Yes, we do," he said. "Question number 1. What the hell?" Dumbledore's bushy eyebrows rose. "I have little doubt that the admonition is deserved, but you will need to be more specific. Your little dungeon crawl to the Philosopher's Stone, that wasn't a real security system. What were you really doing?" "Themiror was a very real security system, I assure you," he countered. "One that was proof against Voldemort and Quirrell in particular. Harley being down there was something I, regrettably, did not anticipate." As for the rest, you may be able to surmise it yourself. I was attempting to set a trap for Voldemort. In Ashul, he said flatly. Dumbledore sighed, looking down at his hands. You must understand, Hogwarts is not and never has been only a school. It is the central institution of wizarding Britain. Over 90% of British witches and wizards have passed through its halls for 40 generations. It is older than the Ministry of Magic, older than its predecessor, the Wizards' Council, older than Gringotts' Wizarding Bank, indeed, older than the Muggle Parliament. It was a fortress against invasion in the Middle Ages and a sanctuary during the witch hunts. Its wards were always strong, and the greatest magical scholars of every generation have added to them. Not exactly filling me with confidence here, Rincewind. Voldemort still got in. To Tony's satisfaction, Dumbledore gave him a confused look at the nickname, but he continued, any fortress, no matter how strong, may still be vulnerable to infiltration, especially with as many people who must come and go from the castle. But I was merely explaining why Hogwarts was an appealing location. The Philosopher's Stone was previously stored at Gringotts Bank, but there was a break-in at the bank last summer, and the stone was nearly stolen from it. And if Gringotts is not secure, then very few places in the wizarding world are, Hogwarts foremost among them. Still a school, Tony pointed out. And you've still got the Philosopher's Stone, don't you? What if he tries it again? I have already spoken to Nicholas and Perenelle this morning, and after a lengthy debate, they agreed to destroy the stone in my sight. Privately, I myself do not know if they will go into hiding and create a new stone under an assumed name, or if, after nearly 700 years, they will decide it is finally time to set their affairs in order. Either way, convincing evidence will be presented that they have died. They have had practice. As for the school, there was a second, equally vital reason to lay such a trap. What's that? The Philosopher's Stone was only a target of opportunity for Voldemort. It may sound incredible, given the lengths he went to get it, but it is not the only way for him to return. It was only the most expedient for him at the time. His main target was, and still is, the person whom he blames for his downfall 10 years ago. The same person who was to make a long-awaited return to the wizarding world this year. No points for guessing that one, he thought. So you're telling me you hid that stone here to lure Voldemort away from Harley? That was one of my goals, yes, he said firmly. You may dispute that, and you would have good reason. But even if we had hidden the stone somewhere else, yes, he would have made an attempt there, but I do not believe he would have left Hogwarts alone entirely with Harley here. Tony felt suddenly uneasy. He remembered what the creepy noseless face had said last night. You see what I have become, mere shadow and vapor. The bastard could definitely hold a grudge, but still his main target, he said skeptically. Why would he care so much about a little kid? But then Anathermary from last night surfaced. Even while he was frantically trying to get his repulsor gauntlet working, some part of his brain was still cataloging everything. But your mother needn't have died. She was trying to protect you. Or a baby, Tony said. No, said Harley's mother died trying to protect her. What did he want with a baby? That is one of the things I wish to speak with you about, Dumbledore said. Harley asked me that same question last night, in fact, but I told her that it would be better for her to hear the answer from you. I believe she is old enough to hear it a few months before Harley was born, when Lord Voldemort was near the height of his power, a prophecy was made. Tony blinked. A prophecy, he said. Like seeing the future kind of prophecy. Yes, Dumbledore said. Like a not by the hand of man shall he fall kind of prophecy. If you are referring to the Lord of the Rings, I believe it is a fair comparison. Come, look. He rose from his desk and crossed the office, weaving between the little tables to a closet. He opened it and withdrew a large stone basin intricately carved with what looked to be Norse runes. This is a pensive, he explained. It is a very rare and priceless magical artifact that allows you to play back memories in the manner of Muggle videotapes. You mean DVDs now, Tony said as he rose to join him. Dumbledore ignored him. Instead, he tapped his wand to his temple and pulled something like strands of gossamer out of his head and placed them in the basin. I, myself, was witness to the prophecy in question. The circumstances are not important to this conversation, only that was a true prophecy. He prodded the silvery substance with his wand. The head and shoulders of a young woman rose out of it, draped in shawls like a stereotypical fortune-teller, and wearing very thick glasses that magnified her eyes so that she looked almost like a giant insect. Then she spoke in hoarse, harsh tones that had an unnatural air about them. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark them as his equal, but they will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies. The vision receded into the basin. And Tony stepped away and slumped back into his seat. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. He'd felt a chill go through him at the words. He wasn't sure he believed in this prophecy idea, but like Harley's description about the unicorn, like the feeling of rushing death he'd felt from Quirrell's curse, some part of him could feel the truth of it. Harley was born on July 31st, he said, putting the pieces together. Dumbledore nodded as he also returned to his chair. There were, in fact, two babies born at the end of July that year whose parents had also fought Voldemort 3 times and escaped to tell of it, Harley Potter and her friend Neville Longbottom. Well then, it has to be Neville, Tony said. He never fought him till last night. Dumbledore shook his head sadly. That is not how it works. James married Lily before Harley was born, and despite almost certainly knowing she was not his from the outset, he accepted her as his own and adopted her into the Potter family. She was born to both of them in enough ways that matter. And you are forgetting the second part of the prophecy. The Dark Lord will mark them as his equal. Incidentally, Voldemort does not know that part of the prophecy. When the prophecy was given, it was overheard by a young man who was eavesdropping, who later proved to be one of his followers, and reported it back to him. But he was caught partway through it, so he was only able to relay to Voldemort the first part, that a child would be born at the end of July whose parents had defied him 3 times. All right, so he didn't know the second half, Tony said, marked as his equal. What does that mean? Her scar foremost. Harley was literally marked by Voldemort's magic, but it is much more than that. By targeting her in the first place, he identified her as a threat to him, indeed, the greatest threat to him. Being the only person to survive his wrath, even though it was not her doing, reinforced that belief, and so headed in some ways make her his equal, equal in fame, potentially equal in influence, equal as a symbol to rally around. You understand why I did not wish to tell her last night, I trust. Yes, he did understand. Even for Tony, who had grown up with wealth and fame from birth, that was a lot to put on a kid. If the prophecy was real, he reminded himself, if Dumbledore was telling him the truth. Yes, everything he said fit with what Tony had seen last night, but the man definitely had his own agenda. Right now, Tony trusted Albus Dumbledore about as much as he trusted Nick Fury. And even if Dumbledore was telling the truth, that was if this whole prophecy thing was any more real than carnival fortune-tellers. All right, let's say I believe all of that, Tony told him. Neither can live while the other survives. That's literally not true. They're both alive now. As I said last night, Voldemort is neither fully alive nor fully dead at the moment, but in this case, I believe we must read it more metaphorically. Certainly, they were both alive on the night when he attacked Harley the first time. Yet neither of them can live free from the shadow of the threat the other poses to them. And then, either must die at the hand of the other. So, you're telling me Harley has to kill Voldemort before he kills her? He demanded. That is precisely the wrong way to think about this, Mr. Stark, Dumbledore said, with an air of finality. Whatever Professor Tolkien may say, not every prophecy that is given comes to pass, and even those that do are infinitely malleable. Who is to say that Harley's hand is not a very powerful and heroic father acting on her behalf? If you were to simply ignore the prophecy and by whatever means fully kill Voldemort yourself, he would be just as dead. Tony grumbled loudly. Then what's the point of all this? He demanded. The key point is not that I believe in the prophecy, or that I do, or even that Harley does. It is that Voldemort believes it. He believes Harley is the greatest threat to him, and he will act accordingly. Ah, so it's like Terminator then, Tony said resignedly. He absolutely will not stop, ever, until you are dead. That would describe Voldemort's attitude towards Harley, yes. Tony leaned forward over the desk, resting his head against his fists. There were so many things wrong with that he wasn't sure where to start. Come on, solve the equation, he thought to himself. It's the same as with Loki. What variables am I missing? Well, for one, he snarled as he thought it. Quirrell had endless opportunities to kill Harley over the past year. After seeing what he did to the Mark Roman 8, he could have done it at any time in class and blown his cover. He looked up sharply at Dumbledore. Please tell me you at least didn't realize Voldemort was on the back of your own damn teacher's head. Of course, I didn't, Dumbledore answered, finally showing a bit of anger. Do you think I would have allowed Voldemort into the castle for an entire year if I had known? You may well object to the trap, but I didn't even want to spring the trap last night while the students were still here. I'd hoped to do it after they had left for the summer, but the unicorn slayings suggested that Voldemort was growing desperate. We were forced to improvise. The night after exams ended was waiting as long as I dared. So Youdid plan for him to come into the castle, Tony challenged him, at a time and place of our choosing, away from the students. In a body that with any luck was too weak to fight, when his attention would be solely focused on the Philosopher's Stone. And by my count, you scored 0 out of 3. Great job. Let's take it from the top, shall we? You didn't think you could keep Voldemort away from Harley forever, so you decided to set a trap for him in the same place where Harley lives. Then you tried to keep the students away from the trap, and guess what? Harley ended up down there with him. And don't say that was because of me. She and her friends were already trying to get down there. If I hadn't been here, they would have either been killed by the Protectioncer. There was a non-zero chance they would have gotten through to him and been killed by Voldemort. You know, you're lucky my suit's trashed. If I still had it, we wouldn't be hashing this out by talking. Dumbledore trembled slightly, then leaned forward and hid his face in his hands. His one redeeming point at the moment, Tony grudgingly admitted, was that he really did look distressed by all this. That was my other great mistake in all this, he said. I underestimated Harley twice over. Tony blinked in surprise. Your mistake was underestimating her. I underestimated her determination and resourcefulness. I expected Fluffy to deter the students from investigating the third-floor corridor, and he did, until last night. But Harley got Hagrid to let slip how to get past him. We tried to keep the matter of the Philosopher's Stone away from the students, and instead we gave her just enough information to be dangerous. She gets that from me, Tony said, with an uncomfortable air of pride. Not a great feeling, being on their other end of it. I think Lily and even James contributed their fair share to that particular trait. Nah, she gets it from me, he insisted. If you knew the kinds of trouble I've gotten in, Tony thinks she gets it some of it from home too. I don't think she had much choice. She had to learn to take care of herself there. He looked sharply at Dumbledore again. Do you know what she went through with her aunt and uncle? In rough outline, not all of it, he confirmed. I am sorry to say I knew it was not an ideal placement, but there were no ideal placements at the time, not with potential threats still lurking around every corner. And as far as anyone knew, they were the only family she had left. Well, they sure as hell didn't help, Tony growled. She couldn't rely on adults growing up, and look what happened. She told me she was scared he'd come after her, and she was scared the head of her house McGonagall. That she'd throw the book at her if she got in any more trouble. I have spoken with Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape about their roles in this, Dumbledore told him. We had already put our plan into motion to spring our trap last night. There was no time to change it. They spoke harshly to the children to try to discourage them from getting too close. Unfortunately, Holly drew the wrong conclusions about Professor Snape, and it only strengthened her resolve, but that was not the worst, I'm afraid. I underestimated Harley even more because I never expected her to be able to get the stone out of the mirror. Seriously, what was so surprising about that? All I heard was some mumbo-jumbo about wanting to find the stone, but not use it. Dumbledore shook his head. The mirror where the stone was hidden is a powerful magical artifact called the Mirror of Erist. When you look into it, you do not see your reflection, but the deepest, most desperate desire of your heart. Harley has seen it before. She is not the only student to do so. To be sure, it can be a dangerous artifact in the wrong hands, but it can also be very useful when viewed under controlled conditions. The better to know yourself, you see. Tony didn't think for a second that was the old Manson motive, but he didn't call him on idiot. Still not seeing the problem, he said. Mr. Stark, have you any idea how few witches could have seen what Harley saw in that mirror? She stared into a mirror that reflected her heart's desire, and it did not show her immortality or riches. Nor did it show her family, as it did before, including you, I now understand. Instead, it showed her what she believed was the only way to thwart Lord Voldemort. Even at the tender age of 11, in spite of all she has suffered already, do not deny, it has remained pure of heart. If fate decrees that Harley is brought into the fight again, Voldemort will have no idea what he is dealing with. Tony wasn't sure if Dumbledore was being sincere, or if he was trying to placate him by praising Harley. He briefly tried to reason it out before realizing he couldn't without knowing exactly how the mirror worked, if it did what Dumbledore said to begin with. Instead, he said, I'm more concerned with how she got dragged into the fight this time. Not only did you scare Hereditary to get through your little dungeon crawl instead of out of it, not only did your pet big-ass Cerberus not stop her, but she and her friends probably could have gotten through most of the other rooms, too. You thought Voldemort would fall for that. Whether he would fall for it was immaterial. The bait was too tempting for him to ignore, Dumbledore insisted. But you must understand, aside from Fluffy, the protections on the stone were meant to keep out one person, Quirrell. They were about his capability on his own, and they were also designed Toad-Matone person, Voldemort. Yeah, sounds great. Expect they were the same person. He nodded sadly. That was, of course, my first great mistake in this. I had thought there was an ironclad reason why Voldemort must have a body of his own. What's that? How else could he have drunk the elixir of life? That brought Tony up short. Okay, that does make sense, if he needed a separate body from Quirrell. I should have anticipated the possibility that he wait until after the fact to acquire a new body another alchemical procedure, by the way. But I had thought he would make better use of the time he spent waiting this year. Dumbledore took a deep breath. For whatever it's worth to you, Mr. Stark, I apologize for placing Harley in danger this year. It is clear that I made several serious mistakes in laying my plans, and of course Voldemort not having a body meant that he escaped the trap regardless. Tony also took a deep breath. He knew what Hugh and Tedto say to Dumbledore. But he also knew he had duties of his own that didn't involve throwing the bastard out the window. Pointedly not accepting the apology, he said, You know, you've put me in a tough spot here, Elminster. See, I promised Holly I wouldn't write off Hogwarts entirely for her schooling. But Yori haven't done a good job of selling it in the past 24 hours. He studied Dumbledore's face carefully. He'd had plenty of experience with people who were after him for his fame, and he liked to think he was good at reading people, at least along that one dimension. Certainly, he'd navigated that world well enough that the only valid paternity claim he'd gotten was no that he thought about it, from the one woman who hadn't known he was rich and famous. Ha! But he had a hunch Dumbledore didn't want to lose his famous student, especially if she was the prophesied savior or whatever nonsense. It was hard to tell. The man had a good poker face, but Tony would rate his expression as carefully neutral. Then what do you suggest? He asked. First of all, if you want me to even consider letting her come back here, you're letting in the loop about Voldemort. Anything involving him, it goes tone before it gets to Harley, unless it's an emergency. I'm her father. I should have the right anyway. Entirely sensible, he agreed. You understand, of course, that there are some things I must keep secret, but those would not reach Harley regardless. Yeah, no surprise there, Tony admitted, again thinking of Nick Fury. Now, second thing, Harley said you were Harry don't know, magical guardian or something. It was on the paperwork from the bank, even though you're not her real guardian now. Ah, yes. I am not certain if there is an equivalent position under Muggle law. For our purposes, I believe there may be a distinction between guardianship and custody. But the key point is that the guardianship of a magical child cannot devolve on a Muggle, doubly so when there is family property involved. I assume you are interested in Harley's placement with her aunt and uncle. But that wasn't my question. I want your name off of it. I see, Dumbledore said. Did you have someone else in mind? Not permanently. I don't want anyone in the government. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them, especially when I'm working with Themi. Don't have any other magic contacts right now, but until I can line up something long-term, I want your Professor Sinistra. Our astronomy teacher, he said, raising his eyebrows. May I ask why? Have you met her? No, but she wasn't directly involved in your Philosopher's Stone mess, and she actually knows what a spy satellite is. That already makes her the best option Harley knows personally. Interesting. Very well, for a short-term arrangement, I believe I can persuade her. Now, on that note, there are several things you will need to know regarding Harley's unique position in the magical world. Beginning, of course, with why she was placed with her aunt and uncle. Family would have been prioritized, but there were other options. These were not considered because Harley gained a unique benefit from living with her relatives, a form of magical protection that she could not get anywhere else. Tony's eyes flashed with anger, and he started to rise from his chair. He could see where this was going. If you think for 1 second I'm going to let her go back there. No, Mr. Stark. I have no illusions that I could dissuade you. But if you take custody of Harley, it is vital that you understand what you are getting yourself into. Tony grudgingly sat back down. Fine, what was so important that she had to live with those assholes? Harley's mother died to save her, Dumbledore explained patiently. She gave her life when she had a genuine option to save herself, no matter how unthinkable that option was. To a witch, that is not just an outpouring of maternal love. It is ancient magic, far deeper and more powerful than any we do with a wand. To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. It is why Harley survived Voldemort's killing curse as a baby, and it is why Quirrell could not bear to touch her last night. But that protection also lingers in a more concrete way, through the blood. Specifically, Lily's blood which she shared with her sister. Wait, do you mean literal blood or DNA? Tony cut in. Excuse me, it is DNA. That is what we in the magical world mean by blood in the sense of inheritance. Though Petunia has no magic of her own, a part of Lily still lives in her, and that part, when combined with the appropriate enchantments, maintains an even stronger protection than that which lives in Harley's skin. And so, I took pains that Petunia took her in. She may have done so bitterly, furiously, but she did things is related to a concept you may know as the laws of hospitality, but it is far more complex than that. While Harley can still call home the place where her mother's blood dwells, there she cannot be touched or harmed by Voldemort, something that even the strongest of conventional enchantments failed to do before. Tony nodded slowly in understanding. That sounded plausibly like something that would fit in a fairy tale. If Dumbledore was telling the truth, that was coming up a lot. Was there a way for him to get a second opinion? Maybe from Ward if they had people who specialized in that stuff. So if I wanted to keep this special protection, Harley would need to reside in the same household as her aunt or her cousin and of their own free will on both sides. Yeah, pass, he said at once. After seeing how she acted last night, Holly might actually go for it if he told her the full story, and that was exactly why he wasn't going to tell her. She's got me, plus the world's most powerful AI, and the rest of Earth's mightiest heroes on speed dial to keep her safe. Dumbledore nodded, which is why I will not attempt to persuade you otherwise. Especially after seeing your performance last night, I know that Holly will be in good hands with you. Now, he continued, the other matters are less weighty, but you should still be aware of them. In the magical world, Harley is considered the head of House Potter. That is not a noble title, as you may be thinking, but it does have legal force, relating to things like disposition of property, inheritance under family bylaws, and places for other family members in Hogwarts, if there are any. And it overrides any Muggle claims. You may change her name in the Muggle world as you see fit, but she will continue to be recognized as Harley Potter in the magical world. Even I, as Chief Warlock, do not have the power to change that. Otherwise, it would technically end the Potter family line, and thus it would be invalid until Harley turns 17 and can make decisions for the Potter family in her own right. I'm annoying, but I can deal with that, Tony said. Very good. Now the other matter relates to your own finances. Forgive me, Mr. Stark, but even in the magical world, I am well aware that you are exceptionally wealthy. Yep, your point. By adopting Harley, you would be officially joining the magical world. Our population is small, and such a large influx of gold or any other currency could be very disruptive. Ah, so you're saying I could buy and sell you all. That remains to be seen. May I ask, how much money do you have? Depends on how the stock's doing. Forbes put me at 12.5 billion last year. That's dollars. Dumbledore hesitated. On hand, he asked. What? God, no. Don't you know how normal rich people do things? I don't know any billionaire who keeps more than 5% in cash. I think I've got maybe 200 million myself. I haven't checked lately. If I buy anything near that big, I get a loan so I only have to pay interest. You are surprisingly forthright about this, Dumbledore said, looking genuinely surprised. Well, it's no secret how the financial system works, at least in general terms. I'm not giving you specifics, obviously. Of course. That will avoid the worst of it, I think. The wizarding world runs on a strict gold standard economy, you see. The goblins of Gringotts Bank will care only about your cash on hand. But even so, I urge you not to enter Gringotts without both security and a legal representative. Even your cash assets would be sufficient to disrupt the entire British wizarding economy. And while the institutional itself is reliable, the temptation for rogue employees to eliminate the competition would be great. Tony scoffed. That's nothing new. People have been gunning for me since before I was Iron Man. I dare them to stare down Pepper and act so tough after that'll, though I suppose, that means I have to ask you for a referral for a magic solicitor or whatever. We do not have solicitors in the sense you are thinking. We have a lawyers' guild, who are empowered to act in all matters relating to the law. The number of lawyers in Wizarding Britain is too small to train them effectively, except by apprenticeship. Now, as Chief Warlock, I am also empowered to act in that capacity myself, but in the likely event that you would prefer someone else, there are some I can recommend. Good. And now that I think about it, there's one other thing. Yes. How do I contact Themerican Magical Government? Chapter 123, 16 June. Letter from Harley to Privet Drive. Letter delivered to number 4, Privet Drive, Saturday, 16 May, 2012. Also included pre-filled forms for terminating the Dursleys' custody of Harley Potter. Dear Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, you asked me about staying at school for the summer, but there were some more complicated things going on. I'm sorry for taking so long to answer. I only wanted to make sure the paperwork was ready first. Last summer, when I went to our bank, I learnt that James Potter wasn't my real father. Aunt Petunia, I'm sure you'll be delighted to know my mum was just as much a tramp as you always thought. With the information the bank provided, I was able to contact my real dad, who is still alive. It was definitely a surprise to him. He says he never expected any kids to show up on his doorstep, but he was willing to start looking into how to sort out the paperwork. I finally got to meet my dad this week. He was very nice about it, and he agreed it was for the best for him to take me in. He found a solicitor who was willing to help him, and he even agreed to forego all money issues if I never have to see you again. I'm told that the enclosed forms will do that. All you have to do is sign where they're highlighted and send them back, and you won't even have to pick me up from King's Cross next week. The consent form is for that last bit. My school agreed to help out with it. That form lets you give up custody before the hearing. The C1 form is the regular custody one, and the FM1 form lets you skip the hearing. From Harley. Chapter 124, 16 June Roman 2, Interlude, Tony. Tony didn't like having to rely on Dumbledore for all of his information. He'd go with one of the lawyers he recommended in the short term because he didn't have any other options. But one priority once he finally got the chance to explore the magical world properly would be to ask around about people who weren't affiliated with him. That would be easier said than done in Britain. Dumbledore was the principal of the only school in the country and a high-ranking government official. Few people weren't affiliated with him at all in some way, and fewer still wouldn't side with Voldemort in his place. Hence the need for an American contact, preferably one outside Ward's clutches as well. And he hated not having a way to take notes. His memory was good, but he'd never get everything exactly. Even if Jarvis wasn't available, he usually had a phone or at least a pen on hand. Hell, even in the cave in Afghanistan, he'd had pencils and paper, even if he'd had to write in code. But right now, he had Holly, who actually knew how to use a quill. And there were a lot of things Dumbledore had told Tony that he wasn't ready to tell her. He knew she was bound to ask about the prophesied prophecy that he, Tony, still didn't particularly believe in. But if Voldemort did, and really, why else would even an insane killer wizard actively target a baby? Then it meant a lot of trouble for his daughter in the future. He was dearly hoping she waited until they were in a more secure environment to bring it up. But for the moment, things were looking up. Madame Pomfrey discharged him from the infirmary, although she advised him to stay away from the student areas if he didn't want to attract attention. She also informed him that she'd scheduled a consultation for him at St. Mungo's Hospital for that afternoon, to be rescheduled if the Quidditch match ran long. At 10:30, it was time to go out to the Quidditch pitch, but thankfully, since he didn't actually know the way, he was intercepted by Holly's head of house, Professor McGonagall, who had only dropped by briefly the day before to introduce herself. "I thought you might like something less conspicuous to wear, Mr. Stark," she told him, "so I dug these out of my old things and resized them for a man of your approximate stature." She then held out to him a bright purple robe with a large gold star on it and a matching hat. Tony stared at them. "Those are less conspicuous," he said. "At Hogwarts they are. They're for pride of portrait. You must understand, Hogwarts receives few visitors, even for Quidditch matches. If you wear these, the students will think you're a talent scout." Tony took the robe and hat. He hadn't been expecting to put on the full wizard outfit, but he could give it a try. It did seem to be cut to fit a man, to the extent it was cut to fit anyone, with how long and flowing it was. Very quickly, he was more worried about tripping over it than looking good. It also wasn't obvious how it fastened in the front, but he made it work. "Your team, I'm guessing?" he asked her. "I never played professionally, but yes," McGonagall said. "I've supported them since I was a student, and my nephew played for them for several years." "You play in school?" "I was a chaser for Gryffindor. I was quite good, if I say so myself, but I took a nasty fall in my 7th year. It was," she hesitated, eyeing Tony's wary gaze. "Well, it was a worse than usual injury, and after that, I lost my taste for being in the thick of it." "Right," Tony said skeptically. He ensured his new pointy hat was secure and told her, "All right, Mother Superior, lead on." McGonagall gave him a suspicious look. Mr. Stark, Hogwarts has not taught divinity since before the Statute of Secrecy, the correct titleless professor. What? That's not that Worcester act, he said. I'm guessing you don't see many movies. Ah, no, she said, relaxing. I believe the last film I saw in theatre was Jesus Christ, Superstar. Tony stared at her in surprise. He would not have called that. My father's idea. He was a minister. Although the show was good, she explained as she began walking toward the entrance hall. I was raised in the Muggle world, much like Harley, you see. However, after that summer, I decided to devote myself fully to the wizarding world. That happened a lot, he said worriedly. It varies. In my case, my mother tried to go fully Muggle, and after seeing how it weighed on her, I realized I didn't ever want that. She looked back and saw Tony's uncomfortable expression. If you're concerned about Holly, she is an extraordinary young woman with an equally extraordinary father. I dare say she will chart a course that will surprise all of us. Tony smiled. Yeah, I bet she will. But it passed quickly as he remembered another issue. Incidentally, I need to talk to you about her, by which I mean what happened the other night. Ah. Yes, I thought that might come up, she said with a frown. I do apologize for my part in placing Harley in danger, Mr. Stark. I was trying to discourage her from interfering with the protections on the Philosopher's Stone, but she was more determined than I thought, going back to try to get past them later. According to Harley, she wasn't even trying to get past them at first. She only wanted to act as a lookout until you chased her away from there. That was when she decided she didn't have any other options. McGonagall slowed and lowered her gaze. It seems I misread the situation, she said. Though standing watch wouldn't have been much better when Quirrell came along. Yeah, especially since he wasn't the one she suspected, but made your mistake before that. You blew her off without hearing out her concerns. Your boss said, Ureth, one Harley is supposed to go to for what did he call it? Pastoral needs. Did you consider asking her which thought the Philosopher's Stone was in danger? She was silent for a minute, but she wore a pained expression as she continued walking. I thought I could already guess why she believed that, she said. We were expecting Quirrell to make his move that night. I didn't know how she found out, but I admit I did all I could to keep Harley away from the secretopration. Tony considered that for a bit, deciding what his next line of attack should be. Harley had been afraid to seek out McGonagall last night, but she also didn't know how. And there was also the problem of Snape. What would you have done if she told you she suspected Snape? He asked. Severus, she said. In the specific instance, he would have asked her why she believed that, given that she was accusing the wrong man. And if a student accuses a teacher of wrongdoing in general, we have procedures for that, of course, varying somewhat depending on the nature of the accusation and whether student safety is implicated. But yes, we take such things seriously. They stepped into the sunlight. Tony hadn't seen the Hogwarts grounds in daylight except through the windows in the infirmary, but it was quite the sight. He still preferred his Pacific coast, but he could admit the remote Scottish Highlands were a beautiful place to live. The sunrises from Harley's bedroom up in the towers must be even more stunning, he thought, at least at the times of the year when they happened, at a reasonable hour. Iwanto put some of the blame on Hagrid, Tony said. He refused to believe Harley when she told him Snape was out to get her. But the thing is, he's not a teacher, and given everything else I've seen, I'm thinking he hasn't had the same training about students having problems. Well, no, not formally, I suppose, she admitted. It might be worth doing, and regardless, it will remind him that such accusations should be taken up with the heads of house. That's a good start. Of course, there's also the fact that Harley didn't know how to find any teachers the other night. What happens if the kids need help after curfew? The prefects know how to reach both me and Madame Pomfrey in case of emergencies. Sensible, he thought, usually, unless they're afraid to approach you. McGonagall stopped and faced him with a stern look. Are you implying something, Mr. Stark? Harley was afraid to approach you that night, even if she knew where you were, he said, matching her tone. And it wasn't just how you blew her off that day. She thought you were still mad about the last time you caught her breaking curfew. Ah, that she said uncomfortably. That was an unfortunate incident all around, and I'm afraid it was for similar reasons. After the first unicorn was killed, we were making an extra effort to protect the students. Except Holly didn't know that, Tony cut in. You punished her worse than normal, but you didn't tell her why. And you punished them unequally. Harley told me you took 50 points from her, but only 20 from that Draco Malfoy kid. There were serious problems regarding communication that night, I will admit, she said. I believed she and Miss Granger were acting maliciously to trick Mr. Malfoy, and when they refused to speak in their defense, I thought I was on the mark. And the other boy, Neville. Harley said you took 50 from him too. McGonagall was silent, and he knew he had her. Now for their Al incentive. I don't think your boss wants to lose his celebrity student, he said. I'm sure he wouldn't say it that way, but I could tell he was thinking it. We were gonna check out other options anyway, but right now I'm really leaning toward Hogwarts needs to clean up its act. Minerva McGonagall, it seemed, was not a woman to be easily intimidated, which in most respects, Tony admitted, was to her credit. Where she had been unsure of herself a moment ago, she now drew herself up and looked him in the eye with conviction. Mr. Stark, she said, I know that I, personally, would be sad to see Holly leave, as would many of her other teachers. But I do not appreciate the implications you cast on Hogwarts or on Headmaster Dumbledore. If you are expecting special treatment, she said disdainfully. Good answer, he thought. No, I'm not asking for special treatment, he interrupted her. I didn't get where I am by special treatment. Money, yes, but not special treatment. I'm just asking you to do your job. Make sure the students know they can approach you with problems. Don't scare them off. And if you want them to trust you, you need to be fair with them and own up to your mistakes. Even just giving Neville those extra 30 points back would be a good start. McGonagall started at the thought. Mr. Stark, point awards and deductions are made many times a day, she said. If we started revisiting them, especially old ones, it would open the door to complete chaos. He shook his head. You're not gonna be able to revisit all of them, I get that. But if it's a big deal, which it sounds like this was, and if it's especially obvious different punishments for the same offense from the same teacher on the same night. Harley may be my only kid, but I remember enough of my own time in school to know kids notice stuff like that, especially when there are prizes on the line. He let her stew on that as they continued down to the Quidditch pitch. With any luck, that would improve things at Hogwarts whether or not Harley came back. Snape was a problem, too, he remembered. Probably a bigger one, in fact. But since he hadn't been the one who tried to kill Harley, Tony needed more information. He wanted a more detailed report from Harley, and he also wanted Jarvis on the case if there was anything to be had there. Then, been ready to confront him. Tony hadn't appreciated how large the Quidditch stadium was from a distance. Despite being an oval, he was pretty sure a football field would fit inside it, and the stands were built for viewing from the level of the goal hoops, 50 feet off the ground. They were also decorated with red and blue banners depicting, respectively, a gold lion and a bronze eagle in heraldic style. It was an impressive sight. Granted, it also looked like it would fit in at a Renfair, but actually not because of its sheer size. Tony soon found himself sitting in the commentator's box along with McGonagall, Dumbledore, a tiny, not quite human-looking man who introduced himself as Professor Flitwick, and a black boy in his early teens with dreadlocks and a mischievous grin who was apparently named Lee Jordan. The rest of the stands soon filled up, or close to it. The stadium was large enough for the entire student body to stand shoulder to shoulder in a single row around it, but they mainly clustered in several rows towards the middle. When the clock chimed 11, Lee Jordan picked up, not a microphone, but a small megaphone, which nonetheless sounded more like a microphone as he called out to the crowd. Hello, and welcome to the Hogwarts Quidditch final, Ravenclaw versus Gryffindor. And here come the Ravenclaw team now, Burrow, Davies, Stretton, Hilliard, McLeod, Page, and Tarmancy. 7 figures in blue robes carrying broomsticks on their shoulders walked out onto the field. Loud cheers erupted from the quarter of the stadium who were decked out in blue, as well as, from the look of it, scattered cheers from the green section. From Harley's letters, it was no surprise Slytherin would root for Ravenclaw over Gryffindor. Professor Flitwick cheered as well. As a reminder of the standings, Ravenclaw is coming from behind, Jordan announced. They have to win the match by at least 160 to win the Quidditch Cup. If they win by less than that, Slytherin wins the cup. But if Gryffindor wins or draws, they win the cup automatically. How is that calculated? Tony asked. It's their win record, then cumulative points difference, then the outcome of their head-to-head match, Flitwick explained. If that was a draw too, the team that caught the snitch is awarded the win. Tony nodded and considered the implications. He only knew the results of 2 of the 5 games that had been played so far, but by that logic, Slytherin must have defeated Ravenclaw, and both Slytherin and Ravenclaw defeated Hufflepuff, although there wasn't enough information to determine the scores. And now, the Gryffindor team, Jordan said more enthusiastically. Bell, Johnson, Spinnet, Weasley, Wood, Eyre and Potter. Tony grinned and clapped while trying not to look too conspicuous about it as Harley and her teammates took to the field in their red and gold robes. Still great luck on the color scheme there. Harley was obviously the smallest one, but she looked at ease as she smiled and waved to the crowd. He wasn't sure if she'd recognize him in this outfit, but she didn't look bothered by anything. Now that he looked closer, those brooms did not look at all like normal flat brooms, especially Harley's. It was closer to an old round broom, but it was far too sleek to be one of those. The brush wasn't brushing, and the handle had a curve in it that vaguely suggested a bicycle seat. In fact, the logistical problems of sitting on a wooden stick at high speeds suddenly seemed like a significant issue. He hadn't thought to ask Harley about it the other night, and she hadn't mentioned it in any of her letters. Are those things as uncomfortable as they look to sit on? He asked. Oh, no, not at all, Flitwick said. Not since the invention of the cushioning charm in 1820. At that, Lee Jordan turned around suspiciously, thankfully covering his megaphone. Are you really a talent scout? He asked. Tony just put a finger to his lips to shush him. Hopefully, McGonagall, who was watching him like a hawk, would keep him in line. By now, the team captains had shaken hands, and Madame Hooch, Harley had told him the name, was starting the match. She opened a box, and 2 of what looked like cannonballs flew out of it and began circling around. Tony thought he saw a glint of gold that must have been the golden snitch taking flight, but he lost track of it immediately. Then the quaffle was thrown, and the players mounted their brooms and rose into the air. Here in an open space, Harley's flight looked closer to his own, but there was still no mistaking it. Her broom was more maneuverable than his suit's. The benefits of using magic rather than rockets, he supposed. It was simply more efficient to turn by leaning into it than pushing with a repulsor. It was also immediately clear that Quidditch was just as mentally taxing as any non-magic sport. Harley was constantly scanning the field, keeping track of 4 balls in 3 dimensions, 2 of which were intentionally designed to try to knock people off their brooms. It wasn't something Tony would want to do without Jarvis if he had the choice, but Harley seemed to be in her element. True to her word, she wasn't just looking for the snitch. In between stretches of an obvious search pattern, she would run interference in front of the Ravenclaw chasers when they approached the goal hoops, and a couple of times, Gryffindor's chasers passed the quaffle to Harley to get out of a tight spot. And all of it done at breakneck speeds more typical of motocross. Jordan's commentary was very helpful in that regard, even though McGonagall had to poke him a few times to stay impartial. But of course, Tony was most concerned about the bludgers. He hadn't expected to be thrown in the deep end of worried sports parent, but there he was. They didn't even have helmets, for God's sake. And with no suit, he couldn't intervene even if he wanted to. He could hear the clang of the beaters' bats on the iron balls from the stands, and he flinched badly the first time Holly had to dodge one. But she just did a barrel roll and easily swung out of its path, while one of her red-headed teammates swooped around and swatted it toward the other team. A few minutes later, one of the Ravenclaw chasers took a direct hit from a bludger to the shoulder, sending him careening out of the air in an apparent death spiral. One of his teammates quickly followed to help him, but he regained control of his broom before he hit the ground. Tony still winced at the sight. "How is that at all safe?" he demanded. Flitwick stared at him in surprise, and Jordan glanced back at him suspiciously again, but Dumbledore explained. "I believe I understand your concern, Mr. Stark," he said. "You will find that witches and wizards are somewhat more durable than muggles. Not only can most injuries not sustained by magic be healed very quickly, but we are more difficult to injure to begin with. Our magic protects us in that regard. Not from the sorts of dangers in your line of work, of course. In other words, Harley wasn't bulletproof, Tony understood. But against simple falls and bludger strikes, it eases the worst of it. Why, I not long ago heard of a boy who fell out of a second-floor window and Bunsettle the way down the street without a scratch on him." McGonagall turned around long enough to reassure him as well, although Tony noted she waved her wand at Jordan before speaking. "Some kind of anti-eavesdropping magic. You should not be overly worried, Mr. Stark," she said. "Your daughter is truly exceptional. She was doing tricks that would challenge players twice her age the first time she ever sat on a broomstick, and she can certainly take care of herself on the pitch." Tony felt pride, even if the praise only took the edge off. "Well, I'm not surprised my brains ended up somewhere," he said. "Although I don't think the crazy death sport would be my first choice. No offense." And indeed, even after that reassurance, he still found himself trying to calculate how heavy the bludgers were and convince himself that the game was safer than it looked. The bludger chateau be hollow, he thought. They were redirected far too easily by the beaters, and they would be far too dangerous otherwise. He started calculating how strong the bats were, but of course, they could be reinforced with magic. Then he found himself calculating how strong the beater had to be to smack them around like that. But even then, the numbers didn't add up. The bludgers would either have to be so thin that they'd need magic to keep them from denting, or the beaters would need magic to save them from a broken wrist in the first half hour. That or the bludgers were self-propelled, and the beaters' bats were just a way of controlling them. But at the very least, from the level of injury they caused, or didn't cause, when players got hit, he could estimate how heavy they'd relative to the players, and it was definitely a lot lighter than solid iron. That was probably the best assurance he was going to get. He also noticed pretty quickly that the quaffle was not falling as fast as it should. It flew normally when they threw it, but it flew too slowly. There was obviously magic on that too to keep it from falling to the ground any time someone dropped it. Gradually, he began to get a feel for the game, applauding at appropriate times when someone made a goal or a particularly impressive save. Gryffindor was behind on goals. Ravenclaw would get their tournament win if their seeker, Tarmancy, caught the snitch, but Gryffindor would finish well ahead if Holly did. He got the impression that Gryffindor had a younger and less experienced team, with Holly being the outlier as a genuine prodigy. Holly was definitely a better flyer than Tarmancy. The first time she dove at the ground from the line of play, Tony rose to his feet, thinking she had seen the snitch, but Jordan soon declared it was a feint, and all she had done was lead Tarmancy on a chase around the stadium where she easily outflew him. Still, Tony could tell she needed to catch it sooner rather than later. If the match went too long, Gryffindor could still lose on goals, and that led him to thinking of other ways the scoring could go wrong. "You know, with those tiebreak rules, you could still have a three-way tie at the end of the season," he told Flitwick during one lull in the action. Flitwick chuckled. "Oh, yes, that's a famous story in my house. It's happened only once in the history of Hogwarts in 1455. Ravenclaw lost all three of our matches that year, but the other three teams ended the season with exactly equal records. While they were arguing over how to break the tie, Niamh Fitzgerald, who was the Ravenclaw captain and a future headmistress, consulted the rule book and discovered that the tiebreaker rule was written so ambiguously that Ravenclaw should be awarded the cup instead. Tony had to fight not to crack up. House of the Smart Kids, indeed. That sounded like something Hugh'd do. After the professors broke up the ensuing fights, the rule was changed, Dumbledore added. Now, if there is a draw, the teams will share the honor, and the cup will be displayed in the entrance hall during the next seasoner. I do believe she has seen it. Tony looked back at the field. Holly had gone into another dive, but she pushed harder as she came out of it, lying flat on her broom and accelerating to blazing speeds. Compared to the other players, that was. Tony could still just barely see a glint of gold racing ahead of her, but Holly was hot on the snitch's tail. Tarmancy tried to cut her off, but he couldn't keep up. After a few more turns and weaves, Holly pulled to a stop and raised her fist in the air triumphantly, silver wings fluttering between her fingers. The crowd erupted with a noise that Tony wouldn't have expected from only a few hundred people. Gryffindor wins, Lee Jordan shouted into his megaphone over the din. Gryffindor wins, that's 260 to 190, and Gryffindors are your Quidditch Cup champions. When Holly landed, she was mobbed by her teammates and lifted up on their shoulders. Already, there was a thunder of footsteps as the rest of the Gryffindors were racing down the stairs to join them. McGonagall was actually crying as she watched. Tony obviously wasn't going to be able to get anywhere near them, but when Holly waved and flashed a 1,000-watt smile up at the commentator box, he thought it was all worth it. An hour later, the sounds of a raucous party were audible from the Gryffindor common room, even through the portrait of a large woman in a Grecian dress who guarded the entrance, but Tony didn't go in there. Instead, McGonagall led him to a small, disused apartment that happened to be just down the hall. In past centuries, it wasn't unheard of for seventh years to be married and have their own apartments, she had explained. She then went and fetched Holly herself, ostensibly to congratulate her personally. Holly was still smiling when she entered the apartment, and she immediately ran to Tony's arms. "Dad, did you see that?" she said eagerly. "That was amazing," he told her. "I couldn't have done that. I mean, I could have caught the snitch, but I still can't fly like that." "It was brilliant," she grinned. "Everyone's really excited. We haven't won the cup in 5 years, and Wood was hoping for a win after he took over as captain from Ron's brother." "Well, you deserve it," Tony said. "And I'm not gonna keep you from your party. I just wanted to congratulate you in person before I go." Holly frowned. "Go? Oh, the hospital thing. Yeah, I'm hoping they can finally fix me up properly." He tapped the arc reactor in his chest. At her continued frown, he clapped a hand on her shoulder and said, "Hey, don't worry about me. It's not like they'll make it any worse, and I've been managing this for 2.5 years already. If they're half as good as your Florence Nightingale here, I'll be out in no time, and we'll be good to meet up again next Saturday." At that, Holly smiled again. "Oh, here, I wanted to give you this," she said. "I asked Madam Hooch if I could keep it. I thought you'd like it." And she reached into her pocket and put the golden snitch she'd caught earlier in Tony's hand. Tony smiled, even as his throat felt tight, and his heart ached for reasons completely unrelated to his injury. "Thank you, Holly," he said. "This is the best present I've gotten since my dad's notes on how to make super-heavy elements." Holly and McGonagall both gave him confused looks. That was a bigger deal than it sounds. It fixed a problem with my old arc reactor, those heavy metals Pomfrey mentioned. "You know what, don't worry about it. You run back to your party, have some fun. I'll see you in a week." "Love you," he said, hugging her again. "I love you, Dad," she said, and with a wave she ducked out of the room.